This is a Going Back, Remembering UGA interview with Frank Halter. We're visiting with him at his beautiful home on Lake Rayburn in the North Georgia mountains. Frank, thank you so much for letting us drop in today.
Pleasure to be with you.
Let's start at the beginning. I know you grew up in Atlanta. Tell us what it was like growing up in Atlanta when it was just a big old southern town and not that fast-paced southern city it is today.
Well, it's certainly changed a lot.
That's for sure.
Well, as obviously, Atlanta was a wonderful place to grow up. I remember I was born in 1929 at Piedmont Hospital. My mother and dad, my mother and father, we had two other children. I had a sister, my sister Ann, and my brother Pete, who lives next door to us here at Lake Rayburn. We did all the things most everybody did. We'd go to the beach in Jacksonville. I remember we'd go there in the summer, and we'd come up to Lake Rayburn right frequently. We would come up here to visit with some friends, the Malones and some others that had homes up here then, back in those days. But the great thing about Atlanta that I think I remember mostly was it was just such a beautiful place to live then. I remember more than anything else spring in the dogwoods. Atlanta just became a festival of flowers when that happened. And it was low key. Nobody got in too big a hurry. A lot of social push in those days, even from the early high school days. But the most important thing, I guess, is the pace of life was a lot different than it is today. Traffic was not really a problem in Atlanta in those days.
Oh, Lord.
No, it was not a problem. And, we had the streetcars that traversed the whole city downtown. And later on, we had the buses, the trolleys that came and went all the way out Peachtree to Buckhead, of all things.
Well, now, Buckhead was the country. Is that right, Frank? Was Buckhead in the country?
Oh, no, Buckhead was pretty much involved when I was in high school because we had a lot of things that we did that were related, mostly the girls at Washington Seminary and North Avenue Presbyterian. But, and I'll tell you a moment about a little bit of that. But the things I really remember, I will never forget, somehow at my age, I went to the Lowe's Grand Theater and stood outside when they had the Gone with the Wind.
Oh, is that right?
And they had Vivian Leigh and Clark Gable were there, and they all came and milled around, and I was standing back so far that I couldn't see, but that was a big, big event. I can remember that very decidedly when I was a young man growing up. The other thing that I remember was just the beauty of Peachtree Street again. Peachtree Street wasn't what it was today. It was just a beautiful, we didn't have all the big buildings, but there was enough down at 5 Points that it was an exciting place to go. And you'd want to go to Muse's Men's Store, or you'd want to go to John Jarrell's. Everybody had to go to John Jarrell's and get a cashmere sweater. Or you had to have your bucks, your white bucks. All that sort of thing was going on back in those days. And there were other things like the entertainment, I remember the Atlanta Crackers. I was a big fan of the Atlanta baseball team out on Ponce de Leon, right across from what used to be the Sears Roebuck warehouse out there. And but those were wonderful days, and a lot of my friends that I still like, Ham Stockton, Ham and I used to go to those games together. I mean, that's how far. He's a year younger than I, but
how'd you get around? Did you?
Oh, I had a little. Back in those days, Ham and I had converted to a little Plymouth convertible, and it wasn't much. It was a great thing to look at, but it wasn't very dependable. But you could get around in it, I can tell you that. And we used to, and sometimes we just catch a streetcar. You didn't have to have that. And not everybody had a car back in those days.
I was gonna say, I bet you were you were cool. I can tell.
Well, no, we weren't. I wasn't cool. Now there were a bunch of cool guys and gals around that were driving these wonderful convertibles and all these other stuff. Unfortunately, I didn't fall right into that level at that time.
Were those the pinks and the gels?
The pinks and the jellies. They were everywhere. And if you didn't have there again, you didn't have your white bucks, and you weren't at Washington Seminary at 3:30 in the afternoon when the girls came out, and you were nothing.
Well, now,
you always
define pinks and gels for me.
Well, it's kind of that. The gels were all good guys. They were the guys that wore they tried to get, they tried to be cool. To be cool today. The Argyle socks and I'm making it sound like we were very Um, we were driven by a lot of things that really didn't mean much, but it was just part of the deal in those days.
We have all, I've spent
But
my
we
life
did-
trying to be cool, Frank.
I know it.
Everybody understands
But
that.
one thing about it, we never took drugs.
Well,
And we never drank much, and beer became something later on, but I didn't know what drugs were until I got a good bit older. I mean, in our group, our crowd. But the Pinks were the really neat gals, and they weren't all neat. They were just pretty girls or not pretty girls, and we'd all end up going to the same dances together. And very often after school, you'd get 5, 6, 7 people in a car and go down to the Pig and Whistle down on Peachtree down there, and everybody used to hang around the Pig and Whistle. I mean, those were, there again, great days. And the great thing about it is I look back, so many of my friends that were my friends back in high school, fortunately, are still around, and we've lost a lot of them. But on the other hand, many of them are still around. One of the things I do remember, I was active in scouting, and I'll never forget that we were called to come down to Peachtree by the Winecoff Hotel when it burned.
yes.
It burned at night, and we were called to go down. They had about, I don't know, they probably had 500, 1,000 scouts down there holding the lines. They put the ropes around the Winecoff.
Mm-hmm.
But I do remember that as a very telling moment and a very sad moment in the history of Atlanta. But you know, we were very much Southern. We were pretty Confederate back in those days in a lot of ways, but we were still broad-minded. Churches played a big part in our lives back in those days. But maybe I'm getting too far off.
You're doing great. I think you have summed up
Yeah.
exactly the kind of things that I wanted us to talk about. Talk a little bit about the high schools. I know they were divided not only on race, but
they
on
were.
gender.
I went through all my life. I spent in public school. I went to you know, we had the grammar schools, and we had back in those days, we never thought much about segregation. But I went to Boys High, but then we had West Fulton, we had North Fulton, we had Boys High, we had Tech High, we had Commercial High for the girls, we had Girls High. I think by then Northside High was built somewhere along in that era. I'm not sure just when. But there were and you had Marist, which was a big Catholic school and a great school. So we, and you know, everybody was pretty much out for education in a lot of ways, but there was a lot of fun and a lot of things happening back in those days. But I do remember, and Boys High always tie in with Piedmont Park because we always ended up over in Piedmont Park over there, you know, right? Well, I can't remember the street that came down and separated us between Boys High and the park, but you know, if somebody had a big fight, they'd go over and fight on one of the greens, and we'd go over there, and when we had our football games in the winter, we would play each other, these pickup leagues. We'd always play over at Piedmont Park, and so you know, it was that was a big part of my growing up, good memories of Piedmont Park, as well as the parks out around Buckhead. What's the big park out there, Fran? You know, the one I can't
Wish
hit
you
it.
had not asked me that.
The big one is still there. It's very active. But I remember they used to have great shows out there. They'd had the
Chastain?
Chastain Park. Yeah, they would bring in these people of note, singers and dancers.
Theater under the stars.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was kind of, I remember that because I didn't see much of that except out at Chastain Park. But getting on back to the university, before I was just really getting ready to go to the university about then, and I had been working every summer. I started at Burt Adams Boy Scout Camp. Scouts meant a lot to me in my life. And not only that, but the troops that I'd been in, the friends I'd made, but Burt Adams Camp was then out at Vinings, Georgia. And there was a big lake, and I'm not sure that lake, I've tried to ride around out there and find that lake. I'm not sure it's not still there. It may have been drained, but...
they probably drained it and put houses on it at Vinings.
Probably. But I do so well remember that as I went to camp there for about 4 or 5 years, from about 42 or 43, and because I would have been 12, 13 years old. And then I was on staff out there for 2 years, which was wonderful. In fact, being on staff at Burt Adams helped me. I got my merit badges, and that's where I became an Eagle Scout, because I had a leg up, so to speak, out there. You can go bird watching and all these other things you didn't watch too much. You didn't do too much around in the hard city. But so I have fond memories of that. The Order of the Arrow was a great organization that I was tapped to be in out there in those days, and it was just it was very special.
That's quite an accomplishment, though.
Well, no, it was
You should
just.
be very proud of.
I'm sorry.
I said you should be very proud of it.
Well, no, I'm not very proud. I'm just I'm very thankful.
I hear you, but I congratulations. I think that's.
Well, thank you. You
great.
go right ahead.
Well, was Burt Adams an influence on you? I was going to ask you about some early influences.
Oh, yeah.
Some folks who.
Yeah, it was definitely an early influence in a lot of ways. I suppose that of anything that I did, and looking back, scouting had as much effect on me because it taught you good values, things that I'd wander off and misbehave every now and then, but I didn't get too far off track.
Oh.
Because I knew I had to be prepared all the time.
I hear you. Well, now, when did you start thinking about Georgia?
Well, I started thinking about Georgia. As a matter of fact, scouting again was one of the things that got me so interested. That we used to get tickets to Usher at Grant Field every Saturday when there was a good football game. And we saw some great football as scouts, and we would usher on a big day, and I remember I saw one Georgia Tech game, and I had been to Georgia to see a football game. We'd ridden over there. We had a little group of us. I think I was about a junior in high school, and I'd gone over to Athens on several occasions and fell in love with Athens, and which is easy to do.
Well, I'm prejudiced, so.
Well, sure you are, Francis. But I can remember so many wonderful days that I had been over there on several occasions that I got to know a little bit about Athens that I didn't know. I didn't know it was affecting me more deeply as I started thinking about going to school. I thought about Tech at one time, but Georgia just always ended up, because all my friends at Boys High, for instance, I'd say probably. As we ended up over there, probably about 60% of my good friends ended up at the University of Georgia, and that was a big influence. Some of them had gone over ahead of me, and that was one reason I went back to Athens from time to time. They'd have a little party, and they had some rushes that were going on, back in those early days, and that's when I ended up in there in that 48-49 Players Phi Delta Theta. And that was a wonderful experience also, because we had, and back in those days, the biggest thing in the university, we were right in between the vets. We had probably 15 and 20 guys immediately around me that had come out of World War II and had gone to college and came to Georgia on a GI Bill after the war was over.
It really made a difference, didn't it?
And it made a difference. You had some wonderful guys getting educations that probably would have never gotten that education. And there was some, and one thing you had to take, when you went to Georgia, I'll never forget taking that course, Contemporary Georgia. You couldn't graduate from Georgia if you didn't take Contemporary Georgia. And it was across, I can't remember that, Fran, that building across from where we used to ring the bell. Was it Meigs Hall? Meigs Hall. Well, that was in Meigs Hall. And I can't remember the professor. I've looked him up, but I can't find him. But, Dr. Meadows. Thank you so much.
That was Claude McBride.
Well, thank you, Claude. But Mary Black, who, and that's where I met my wife, by the way, in that Contemporary Georgia course.
How about that?
She and Mary Black, Mary had gone to the University at Furman for 2 years, and my wife had gone to Washington, Mary Washington for 2 years, and they both decided they want to go to the University of Georgia. And so they ended up in Contemporary Georgia, and we sat next to each other, right around each other, and that's where we developed. And Mary Black's still one of my dear friends to this day. She married a guy that we we knew well all the way through the university. He went to Clemson. He couldn't help that, but he was a good man. I love Clemson, except we played Georgia.
Oh.
But anyway, so that was and the amazing thing you had to remember was that Georgia had you had to know how many houses in Georgia had screen doors and windows.
That was the main thing in contemporary
That
Georgia?
was the main thing you had to know.
Well,
excuse me.
I was going to say, let me draw you back to your first days at the university.
Yeah.
Frank, when you stepped on the campus as a student, do you remember the physical layout?
Oh,
what?
yeah. I mean, you walk on an old campus up there. You walk through those arches, and you walk down, by the, what's that main building there on the right?
That's the academic building.
Academic building.
Holmes Hunter building there.
Yeah. You walk down through there and going down through the business school and the journalism and the law school and language and all that. I mean, it was just that little circle in there. That's where the Demosthenians and the Phi Kappa was one of, which was our debate deal. Phi Kappas, was that was one of our Demosthenians and Phi Kappas. And those beautiful little buildings, so they're still there.
Yeah.
I mean, they're so historical you can't even.
It doesn't look much different these days.
It does not. And the School of Landscape is, as far as I know, unless they've moved it over to Ag Hill or somewhere now, it's still there. I think.
It's back over there, sort of behind them.
Yeah, and then and the street layouts were so. I remember so well. Like Millage Avenue was so. You get out on Millage and you go crazy. That's where all the girls' sororities were, but Baxter and Broad Street and Prince Avenue, which I lived on. I lived on Prince for 2.5 years.
Well, tell us about you. Did you tell me that you lived with you roomed with somebody on Prince Avenue?
Yeah. Well, no. What? Yeah. A dear friend of mine, Pete Carter, and I went to Georgia together, and we had a room a little apartment we took out on Millage Avenue, and it was really rough. It was an old house. And we lived in that apartment for about a year, and John Wilcoxon, who lives in Atlanta now, he roomed with us part of that time, Pete Carter and I. And then that next year, we were trying to find a little better place because we still couldn't get in the fraternity house.
You mean it was so full,
folks
wouldn't leave, huh?
It was full, yeah. They wouldn't, and you had a lot of older guys in there too, who were the vets. But we found Miss Ferguson, whose husband was Mr. Dick Ferguson. I think he passed away.
He did.
And she gave Pete and I the opportunity to take a room and a bath, and I think we stayed there for about 2 quarters. And I remember she was such a wonderful lady. And I've seen her I went by the store one day some years later, and I think I met her son.
Did?
But I've seen her on occasion since then, but I remember she was such a tremendous lady. And the Fergusons, and I was talking with my friend Ham Stockton this morning, and Stockton tells me that Dick Ferguson had a son, and then the son has a son, and that Stockton played golf with him at Peachtree Golf Club this past Sunday. Is that a small world?
It is a small world.
Is that a small world?
And Ferguson's was a mainstay in Athens for years.
Yeah.
They're not downtown anymore, but they're still a Dick Ferguson's.
Where are they now?
They're out in Beechwood Shopping Center.
Okay, Beechwood, okay. All right.
So it is interesting to hear all those old connections.
Yeah. Well, they were, and there were so many other memories that I had of the campus. Ag Hill and Coordinate campus. Coordinate was way out at the end of Prince Avenue. And I think that y'all reminded me a while ago, we used to have, Claude, they used to have the shirt tail deal. We did parade all the way out to Coordinate campus.
I want you to describe Shirt Tail Parade because I think that
well,
folks in this room
Claude would better. All I remember that everybody pulled their shirt tail out and they went.
Took your pants off.
Well, I couldn't. I don't know that I got that far. But
took your pants off and wore your bathing suit or your boxers or something. And ran in your shirt tail all the way out from the arch to Prince Avenue.
I remember that. I participated. I think from the Fidel House out to about. I didn't start downtown.
I tell you that.
But there was some great, and another thing was ringing the bell. I remember that when I was a freshman, as a sophomore, we'd have to, every time Georgia won, some of us have to go back and ring that
That's
bell
right.
on campus.
It's still ringing that bell. I
still-
hope they get to ring it a lot this year. What do you think?
I don't know. I'm worried about this year.
We'll
I'm worried
see.
about this year. But, I've been worried before when things turn out. But getting back, I would like to mention a couple of, Dr. Idaho was president then, and Ed, his son, was a fraternity brother of mine. He later became a wonderful doctor, and Ed died several years back. I remember him so pleasantly, and Dr. Martin, I think then was dean of the School of Arts and Sciences, as I recall. And of course, my absolute favorite was Dean Bill Tate. I mean, he was everybody's good guy, and he would reach out and help you whenever he could.
That's right. Make you walk straight.
It made you walk straight. And but I was in the School of Political Science. I was originally going to go into law school. I was going to take. They were offering a joint degree then. You could take a poli-sci and a law, and you go. My recollection was it was 5 or 6 years. Well, I had gotten into my 3 years, starting my 4th year, and I got drafted. I got my draft notice in August, so I just went on and got my major in political science, and never went to law school. I don't know whether that's good or bad. Anyway, I never went to law school for that reason. But
Frank, where did you eat?
oh Lord, we ate everywhere. Well, the Fidelity, Miss Griggs was our house mother. And they had a very able staff, and they cooked wonderful meals. But I was talking with Claude, and the Snack Shack was one place I'd forgotten totally about. Uppy's, Harry's, the Prince Avenue Cafe, it was really the Prince Avenue Pharmacy. The Varsity, I mean, that was staple diet there. I mean, at the Varsity, everybody ate at the Varsity. And I had grown up eating at the Varsity.
Well, I was going to say, and women still could not go into the Varsity.
Yeah, well, I didn't remember that. The women could not go.
Women could not go into the Varsity until about the early 60s.
Well, friend, I never knew that. But, and Frank Gordy was a fraternity brother of mine. He was a Phi Delta at Georgia. Young
right?
Frank.
He
died early on, but he was a wonderful young man. But his father, started that wrestling in Atlanta.
Back in the 20s?
Yeah, back in the maybe early 30s. I'm not sure. But anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry, I'm jumping.
No,
around.
I know the eating.
But we would eat and we were dating some then, and we would go places like Uppy's. There were some pretty good spots, and a lot of them were just kind of beer halls, and you'd get a hamburger and a beer or something. They're hangouts.
Just a drive-in. Where did you, if you had a date and wanted to go to have a nice dinner somewhere, where would you go, Frank?
Today?
If you had a date.
Oh.
And you wanted to have
one place that used to be a good place to go eat was the Georgian Hotel.
It was a little step above.
Yeah.
Right.
The Georgian Hotel.
Was Tony's in Athens? Was Tony's restaurant?
No, I don't think Tony's was in there back in. I can't remember that one, but I remember the Georgian Hotel, and then there were some other restaurants that were a step above, and I'm having a hard time because I was usually a step below financially.
Well, how did you get around?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, most everybody had a car. I didn't have a car then because our little Plymouth, we had left it in Atlanta. But we had cars in the fraternity. We had some of the girls had cars. So we'd take off every morning. I'd walk over to the campus, from time to time. It wasn't that bad.
Somebody said that they caught rides from the Coordinate campus often, and that it was just a matter of life in Athens that you thumbed a ride.
Oh no, you could get a ride. Safe. Yeah, you could get a ride if you stood out there on the corner of Prince there at the PA, and you needed a ride. You could flip. People would pick you up. But we normally had a group that rode together. We'd have 4 or 5 of us, and maybe a couple of them would have a car, and I'd bring a car there maybe on some weekends, and we'd play around. Pete Carter, my dear friend, who I lived with 2 years over there, had a wonderful Mercury convertible.
Oh, see, y'all were cool. I had a fella tell me when we were talking earlier. He said that he he had a car, and that he didn't realize till much later that it was not his personality that drew people to him. Was his car.
It was his car. Well, and Pete was a wonderful guy, but that wasn't the case there. But he and we probably had a half a dozen guys that had pretty nice cars, and we'd get around fine. I never really thought of that as being a big problem.
I think people just walked more, and that's what you did.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't make much difference. You're going to go. I got a grandson over there that he doesn't walk anywhere.
Well, I think that's the way things are these days. Talk about campus politics.
Politics were not a big item back in those days that I recall. You had the GOP, which was a grand old party. There was a lot of that were ag. They were
the independents.
They were independents. They were non-fraternity, and anyone could join the GOP, as I recall. You didn't if you weren't in a fraternity. If you were in a fraternity, you didn't join GOP. But I remember Wingate, and there were 2 or 3 other guys that I remember who were real campus leaders, who were real active in. You remember Wingate, who was active in the GOP. And they were a real wonderful group. There was never anything that would create feelings of,
no tension.
There was no tension that I can ever remember. And that was one thing, as I mentioned earlier about the university. It was such a wonderful melting pot. I think those veterans coming back, like we had a big chunk of them, added some stability, where these young guys weren't just these guys would straighten you out in a hurry if you started getting off base a little. And I had some in my fraternity that I remember very, very, very well, and they would set you straight and set you free.
So it was an era of good feeling.
Era of good feelings, and it really was.
Like a great time.
And we were talking this morning, there really wasn't, and the country was kind of, we were kind of moving along. We had several things that were happening. I guess Truman had committed troops to Korea. We had the United Nations, I think, was probably formed along in there. I remember the big thing was Dewey had won the election. I'll never forget
so
that.
He thought.
That was like 48 or somewhere in there,
Yeah.
47, 48, and Dewey had won, and there Mr. Truman was our president. And there were a lot of, but and I think the Chinese were acting up, and some things were going on over in Europe. The Russians were kind of doing this and that, but and we were more interested in who was playing at the Masters than anything else. What was the lineup at the Masters? We'd never miss a Masters back in those days.
Everything was more.
And we had at least 10 or 12 guys at Fidelis that were from Augusta, and it was great.
Good connection.
Good connection. Bev Dolan was one of the best.
Good connection.
Bev Dolan and his brother started Easy Go Golf Carts down in Augusta. And that became a mammoth company.
Absolutely.
But anyway, on from there, Miss Fran.
Talk about social life in terms of on a weekend.
Social life.
What you did and where you
went. There were myriad of dances. There was always a dance. We had some of the big names that would come to, like the Dorseys and Stan Kenton. I remember he was so great when he came to the university. And we had that and Claude would remember, but that's down by where the Tate Center is now. I can't remember
Stegman Hall.
Was that Stegman Hall?
Was it Stegman or Memorial Hall where you
I can't remember whether it was a Stegman. Weren't they right there together? But it seems to me one of those is both are gone. Are they both gone now?
Stegman's gone.
Yeah, Stegman's
Woodruff
gone.
Hall.
Okay. And but we used to, and I do remember the stag lines y'all were talking about. I usually would have a date. I rarely ever went without a date.
This fella told us that stag line was the most wonderful thing because you could dance with all the pretty girls.
You could?
And that you just, you started dancing, and if you had gotten as much information as you needed there, you nodded at somebody in the stag line, and they came and broke on you, and then you could go to the next pretty girl.
Yeah. No, you could. That's right. And I do remember that because a lot of them were dancing to my date.
See. How about big events?
Who's that? I'm sorry.
Homecoming, big events.
Oh,
homecoming,
yeah. Listen, football games and homecoming, and I mean, you just couldn't, you couldn't imagine. And depending on how big of the football game was and how everybody got roused up when Auburn would come over or Tech would come over, and such great. We had so much good fun with that. And it was a big weekend. I mean, it'd start on Friday or Thursday night, and it would go all the way through the weekend.
Had y'all started building those huge things out in the front yard then, as you
yeah.
built a paper mache or crepe paper?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. We did that. We decorated big time.
Floats
floats and the whole bit. And it was that came a little bit later. It really wasn't so much early on. It seemed to me that would have been in the 49, 50, 51 era back in there, more of that. It might have picked up a lot after I left, but it was big events were just there was always something going on at the university. And I can remember and I may have some great memories. I remember when Furman University came over and played Georgia at night one time, and I think the temperature went down to 18 or 19 degrees. And we had all had a little touch of that moonshine, and we'd mix it up with some grapefruit juice, and you could turn it up, and the grapefruit juice would freeze on the rim of the cup. And that's when we decided we were going to go home.
Time to go home.
Time to go home. But and we didn't do a lot of that, but we did some of it. And drinking was not a big thing at Georgia then. There was probably a good bit of beer. You'd have those big deals down the river, those beer drinking contests on the river. You'd see how much you could drink. The different fraternities would send their best drinkers down there. and they were barrels, they were pumping them out of the barrel. Everybody had those barrels back in those. You didn't see many bottles. You had the barrels and the cups.
Jack Davis has a great cartoon of being on the river.
On the river, yeah. Well, that was special, boy. You'd go down there, and it could be an all-day event.
Was there? Talk about River Road then. Were there fraternities on River Road?
River Road then was a non-event almost as far as we were concerned. There was something out on River Road that seemed to draw me, but I don't think we had any fraternities on River Road back then.
Weren't out there.
To my knowledge. Huh?
The tank sheds, ROTC.
Oh, okay. The tank sheds were out there. But I don't recall. They came really kind of after I left. There might have been something going on.
Go back then and talk about where the Fight Out House was on Prince Avenue.
Prince Avenue, right. And it was just out of town. It was just like 3 blocks down. There was a mortuary right down.
McDormand's.
Who?
McDormand's.
Yeah, it wasn't.
McDormand's.
Yeah, it was something else then. It wasn't McDormand's, I don't think, was the name then. It was a mortuary, but it was Eddie Henning, one of my good friends, worked there, worked his way through school, working at the mortuary. and that's the reason I used to know something about that. We'd go down and he'd teach us a little about what was going on down there.
Oh, golly.
But it was very private. It was very private. And one thing, I go back again, I was thinking about did I mention Dr. Kaplan? I think I might have been Dr. Shedd in Spanish and Kaplan in classical culture. And we had some just wonderful guys back in those days that really kind of got you and grabbed you. And I was talking to Mayor Black yesterday, and she was talking about our good dean of Dr. Dean Tate. She had gone to Furman and finished full 2 quarters of geology. And she'd come up at the university and was going to be short because she transferred graduating. And she wrote Dean Tate a letter, and she said she had it in her scrapbook last night when she read it. Dean Tate had written her back and said, "Yes, Ms. Black, we will accept those credits for your year of geology, and you are clear to graduate from the University of Georgia."
He did wonderful things, didn't he?
That was she was not taking one of the other sciences, but he thought the geology was great. They were rounding you anyway. You want to go out and start cracking rocks. They want you to go out and be good people.
You're right on that. I think he's come up in every conversation we've had.
Because he was really quite a guy, and he was always. I remember him, and one thing I remembered always is relationships, and that's to me the most important thing in life anyway. And it's those relationships that you created back then and carried forward throughout your life that really make life worth living.
That's the truth. That's the truth. And this school was just sort of a nexus for so many of those.
It was just there, and it kind of stirred everything up, and And when I even left, you know, and then we had, Laura was a graduate of the university. Laura finished over there, and and I've got my son who passed away 3 years ago, Kane, he graduated. And then I got 4 nephews, and Sue next door, who we were just talking to, my daughter, my sister-in-law, she graduated from there, and then young Kane Halter's over at the University of Now. He plays KA, and he's in his sophomore year.
It gets in your blood, doesn't it?
Yeah, and he loves it. And I got a granddaughter coming along now who's making noises about going to the
Well, good. Frank, you had mentioned earlier that you met your wife in Contemporary, Georgia. Talk to us about where it went from there.
Well, it started, and we all got real close because we used to chew a lot of gum. We'd take that the little silver foil, and we'd make little cups, little wine cups, and we'd pass those around to different people. It was a pastime to get you through Contemporary, Georgia. But anyway,
a stimulating course.
Yeah, and then it was a stimulating course. And then Mary Black, who I just mentioned to you earlier, who's Mary Robinson now, a friend of 60-odd years, and she was in that class with us, and we became great friends. And I started beginning to, I had dated some other people the year before, and I started seeing Shirley some, and then it kind of led from that. Then we became pinned, and she became, you know, active in everything that we were doing.
Talk about pinning.
Well, back in those days, you know, it was kind of, it was kind of like, I had a good friend of mine that had the name for it, lavalier, that was it. You became lavaliered, and I couldn't remember that. But when you were lavaliered, it was kind of like you were titularly engaged.
Engaged to be engaged.
Well, it was kind of, you know, you'd kind of put your brand, and she'd put her brand, and she'd wear, you know. But it was a very simple thing. I mean, but she was. And she was popular, and
well, it meant she couldn't date anybody else, didn't it?
Well, she didn't date anybody after that. So anyway, but she did date a good bit when she first came down there, because we didn't really get started seeing each other for about 6 months a year. Excuse me. But she was living at Lucy Cobb. And so was Mary. All the girls lived at Lucy Cobb, which was a wonderful place. That old building. Is it still there? Have they torn it down?
It is there. They've restored it, and it's where the Institute of Government is now.
Okay. Well, I thought they had done something to keep Lucy Cobb, because
you ought to go by and see it.
That was the old classic city classic there, you know. Yeah. I thought. But anyway, we started dating, and then one thing led to another, and as I said, we became pinned, and then we started seeing more and more of each other, and I'd come up to Greenville and visit with her parents, and she'd go to Atlanta because she knew everybody I knew, and so we just kind of kept that going for a good while. And then when I got my draft notice, and they let me finish school, that was part of a good Dean Tate. They'd always give you a deferment to get you through that next year, and I did. And so we decided that if I was going to be going up to basic training and I was going to try to get in cadets, but I got in officers candidate school, that we'd go on, and she wanted to go on and get married. So and so we planned the wedding and had a beautiful wedding in March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, in Greenville, South Carolina, at the 4th Presbyterian Church. And as I said, many of these friends that I've mentioned were there for that wedding. And and then I had found a little apartment. We didn't have a place to live, so I went out to Winterville. I don't know what Winterville's doing now.
Winterville's still there.
It's still there, and they had a beautiful little garage. There was a lady had kind of a little kind of a little garden. She had maybe 3 or 4 acres, but she had a garage, and she had a beautiful little upstairs garage apartment. And we rented that for the 3 months, March, April, May, and part of June when I left. And so that's where we lived. And then I left immediately after graduation, I went on and joined the Air Force rather than being drafted. And I went on from there. Shirley came back to Greenville. I went to basic training. Stayed there for, I don't know, 3 months or 4 months. Had applied to try to get in. I was trying to get a commission, and I got in Officers Candidate School. And went back to Denver. I'd already been to Denver once, and then went back to Denver, Colorado, to take my air intelligence training, where I'd done the same thing as an airman, but I was now doing it as an officer.
Sounds like the military.
Huh?
It sounds like the military.
Yeah, it's like the military. I did the same thing, but we loved Denver, and we were there for off and on for 6 months at a time. And my oldest daughter, Debbie, was born in Denver. Yeah, and when we were in the Air Force, and they had from there they sent us out to California, and we were out there for 6 months or so. And I got notice they were going to send me to Korea, so we came back to Greenville. And but Shirley and I, that's where it all got started. And while we were doing that, Bubba, her father, kept saying, "Frank, you got to come join me in the company, because there's no other guys out there." And so I said, fine. I finally agreed, and worked that 2-year. We had agreed to a 2-year deal and see how it worked, and it worked out pretty good. So I ended up, that's where I've been ever since. And we've now grown to be a pretty good sized company through the years. And times haven't been too good of late in 2010, but no, it was 2009, but we're praying it's going to get better. Let's see, but then we ended up having, we had blessed with Laura and son Kane and son Brad. Brad works with our company and has been with us now for probably 25 years or longer. So, but we've got a good, solid little company that's homegrown. We're now associated with Coal Banker, and did that about 12 years ago. But we were King Company, and we did a good bit of development and other things, and whatever you might want to hear about that.
Well, I've got some other things to ask you. So
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. I know you joined. So you joined King Company in '53.
Yeah, 53. That's right.
And then you were named president in '68.
Yeah.
And it is more than a little real estate
It's
company.
got to be a big
It's a
company.
premier real estate
Yeah, it's got to
company,
be.
one in the state.
Well, I wouldn't say we got bigger, nobody better, but we got some bigger ones.
Well, you did Mr. Kane a favor, I
Well,
think. So
it was a joint venture, really.
well, I know there's some special things that you're proud of, and I have a list here, but you tell me, what are you proudest of in your professional career? I'm looking at McAllister Square.
Well, I mean, we did some significant developments along the line, and I was a mixed bag. We did a lot of things. We did shopping centers, we did some office buildings, we did some warehousing, we did a number of subdivisions, we did a number of condominium projects. Fortunately, all of those were done in the good years, and they were all pretty successful. Mm-hmm. And we've always had a large residential presence with anywhere from 100 to 150 to 175 associates, agents. We've got a commercial department, and all of that has just come along as we have developed through the years. We've had, if I had any objective, it was to try to keep the company going and have something to leave behind for all the guys and gals that have made it work. And sometimes I'm not sure I've been very successful the last couple of years.
I think you've done a great job. Huh?
But I enjoyed that, and of course family and that business has been extremely important. My church has been I'm Episcopalian, I'm pretty active in our church. I've been pretty active in a lot of other endeavors around the community. I've been pretty well.
I've got a list. I'm going to mention some of those in a minute, but I want to say to you what a pleasure it must have been not only to see Greenville, but to help Greenville become the city it's become, because I think there's no question that you had a lot to do with it.
I had something to do with it along the way, yeah. We had one thing, we had a lot of good fresh young leadership coming along. Back in those, we had Mr. Charlie Daniel, who was from Anderson, over there near Piedmont. You're right. And we had, but Mr. Daniel had Daniel Construction Company, and he was a kind of a forerunner because he was doing so much work during the war and after the war. And he brought so many good people into Greenville. That was the beginning. And then we had good companies like Liberty to Life and a lot of homegrown companies. And then we got Michelin, which has been a bonanza for us. Huge company and just such a great community sponsor and associate. And then we've had BMW, which has been an unbelievable experience. So all those things have come together. As I mentioned earlier, we were really just a textile town back in the 50s, 60s, but the textiles were great, back then. But when textiles started falling on hard times, we started falling on hard times. So there was a direction that a lot of us, through chamber and other activities, decided we had to get out and begin to create a new place for new companies and to attract more people into Greenville. And I think we've done a pretty good job. And actually, I'm kind of in the past tense now because I've kind of dropped out of a lot of that stuff. I'm still active, kind of ex officio on some of it.
Well, based on this list, you get to sit down sometime. I want to mention a few of these things, Frank.
Yeah.
In terms of your community involvement, you've been a past director of the Peace Center for the Performing Arts, director of the YMCA. Leadership positions with the Greenville chapter of the Red Cross, the Rotary Club. I'm going to keep going and embarrass you. Christ Church Episcopal School and United Way. You've donated your time to the soup kitchen there, Project Host. Served as a trustee of the chairman of the Greenville Hospital System Foundation.
That was a long tenure there, that hospital. I got really involved with the hospital for 10 or 12 years,
And thank goodness good people do that. And past president and chairman of the Greenville Chamber of Commerce. And I do want to mention, before we go to maybe some other things here, I want to mention that we received back in May the Order of the Palmetto, which was the highest level of civilian honor bestowed by South Carolina's governor's office for lifetime achievement and service to the state.
That's pretty nice. Yeah, and I was thrilled. I was happy about it. Totally. I still don't understand why at 80.
Oh my gosh.
Why they did that? But the truth of the matter
because
is,
of everything you've done.
No. There are other guys that could have done the same thing and are doing it. But I had a number of my friends who had either been recipients of that award, but willing to nominate me, and I didn't know they were doing it. And then the governor makes that decision with these. Anyway, and it was a pleasure and an honor to receive that award.
Well, it's good to see people who deserve it.
Receive
recognition.
Was, but I can think back to why I got we think about awards that you get. The award, I got the Red Triangle. I don't even know knew about the Red Triangle, but that's a YMCA award that meant almost as much to me. It was, well, they all mean something, but the bottom line, I just kind of dust that off and get on with the program.
Well,
humility has been one of my great, one of the greatest things that I got going. I'm a very humble guy, and I don't mind telling you that.
Frank, I want to talk a little bit more about life on campus and maybe life while you were living at the Phi Delta Theta house. Talk about living in a fraternity house in the late 40s, early 50s at the University of Georgia, and mention some of those things. I know the Bowery Ball was Phi Delta Theta's big dance, and some of those.
The Bowery Ball was always a big deal, and it was a bad time because really it was a signal to go out and drink more than you should, and a lot of those guys didn't handle that very well, and we were embarrassed a lot of times at the Bowery Ball. but anyway, everybody dressed up, in that seashore. What was it? Kind of a captain's pirate kind of a thing. I think was sort of the mode of what you were supposed to do. But anyway, wonderful times. And Bowery Balls of Phi Delta's been held, I guess, all over the world. I'm not sure, all over the country. But it was kind of special at Georgia. But living at the Phi Delta house was like a lot of these things you've seen on TV and the movies, when these guys are all
Animal House.
Animal House. It was like Animal House. I mean, you can't get around it. But, nobody ever hung anything up, and you might find, no telling what you might find in your room the next morning, and no matter who you might find in your bed when you went to bed at night, maybe somebody, that didn't belong there. It was just all sorts of stuff that went on. But the great thing about it was we all survived, and we could clean that place up, and it could be so sharp and spiffy you would not believe it. That didn't happen every day. But I can well remember, and we'd borrow each other's clothes. I had a couple of really nice cashmere sweaters that got a lot of work from good friends of mine who wanted that sweater for this particular night. And I did the same thing. You know, we'd all borrow stuff back. You girls used to do that when you were growing up, borrow stuff. But basically, it was a good environment. Ping pong was everything. You played ping pong every day and every night. And we had a couple, I think we even had 2 tables over at one time. And we had champions in the ping pong, and that was a big, big deal. You'd get a crowd over and they'd bet on who was going to win. And there was really some great ping pong players. But anyway, in the meantime, we're still trying to get an education. And but the thing that also I remember is the house mothers, and we had 2. One was Miss Griggs that I did remember, and they were like mothers. I mean, those ladies just did remarkable jobs, and they had the cooks and the people that worked with us off and on for years, and they became like part of the family. So it was it was really a good, as opposed to say being in a dorm somewhere, a sterile dorm. I don't guess as much. I never lived in a dorm, so I don't know. But all of my grandchildren have lived in dorms, and my children have lived in dorms. But anyway, it was a great experience, and I would have recommended it to anybody, and thought it was wonderful.
Just get your tetanus shot and make sure.
Oh yeah. And then a few fights every now and then. One of my dear friends, he was a little guy. His name was Graham Dugoff. He's since died. And he got in a fight one night with one of his best friends, who was a big guy. And Graham and he, I don't know why they did it, but then I'm trying to think of the guy's name, and I saw him in my book the other day. But they got in the fight, so Graham couldn't do anything. Graham just got up and bit his ear and bit a little chunk of his ear off. I'll never forget that, because they got the ear and they took him over to the hospital and they reattached a little piece of his ear. Oh, maybe it was hanging, I'm not sure.
Oh, my
but now
goodness.
those things that's not anything you want to write home about. But those things, well, you talk about some of the things that did happen.
We're
that
talking
did
about
happen.
real life.
Real life.
Well, let me get you to go a little further then. I can't, I want to hear about what were the shady places.
The
shady places in town that where you.
See, by then I was, where we spent most of our time, I will tell you, we'd go over to the Chi-Fi house, we'd go over to the KA house, we'd all go over to the SA house, we'd go to the Fidel's house, and everybody, they would have dates and they'd go over to somebody else's house. They'd go over, they were having a beer, or they were going to do this or do that. So a lot of our social life back in my days, pretty much, and we go to the sorority houses occasionally. That wasn't a regular occasion because you really weren't invited there. But we'd all go over to Lucy Cobb and study, and you always had a bunch of guys at Lucy Cobb.
You were telling me there really were no shady places. There were no bad places
down
on the river.
I had so much going on, I didn't have time to hang around those shady places.
Well, listen to this, y'all. All right, we'll let y'all.
Well, if I think of it, I'll write you and put a little addendum in there.
Tell me the Joanne Terry story.
Oh, Joanne. Yeah, well, we kind of skipped over. Joanne was she was the Pandora Beauty thing. She was the sponsor. Well, she was the
Miss Homecoming.
Yeah, Miss Homecoming. Yeah, Joanne. And she was from Gainesville, and she had a bunch of classes, and a friend of my wife, Shirley, and mine. And so when school was over, Joanne went her way, and we went our way to Greenville. Well, not to Greenville, I went in service. 3 or 4 years later, I was out one day, and I look up, and there's Joanne Terry in Greenville. And I said, Joanne, what in the world are you doing? She says, well, I finished Georgia, and I went into marketing, and I'm working for Sears Roebuck. So she married, and there was another guy there, his name was Fred Walker, who'd gotten out of service. He was a pilot. And they were just married, and he was from Tennessee and she was from Gainesville, and so they had a little house in Greenville, and so they became our best friends, reignited that friendship we had years ago, And then they bought a home, and we had built a home, and they bought it next door to us, and we lived next door to each other for 59 years
Something?
in Greenville.
What a great story.
And Joanne is still a dear friend, and they've now moved to this real fancy retirement facility, and Shirley's died, and we still go out. I have a friend of mine, we go out there occasionally and have dinner with them, and they come. But Joanne Terry, if you go back and think about Fred Walken, and Fred became president of Henderson Advertising Company, which was a big advertising company in Greenville. They did work all over the Southeast and well all over the country. Jim Henderson founded that company. But Joanne is still one of our dear friends, and there we were in all of our classes back in
back in
back in 48,
at
49.
Athens, Georgia,
you know.
University.
So
That's
there
great.
again, how small can the world become? I mean, it's just, good things happen.
That's a great story. Can you talk a little bit about your time in the service when you actually were
Yeah, well,
in
the
Korea?
service, once I got, when I got my commission, I went on to Air Intelligence School, where I was taught Air Intelligence School. The intelligence is not like you're creeping around a corner somewhere. The intelligence we were trying to do was instruct our pilots and our flight crews on things that could happen from an intelligence standpoint. In other words, if you're shot down, where's the best place to go, and where do you set your emergency channel on so there'll be somebody wrecking over you and come pick you up, helicopters usually. The other was we had a lot of anti-aircraft fire over in Korea, because they had certain bridges and rail yards and all where they just packed everything into, and when our fighter bombers would go in, they were easy targets for a lot of it. So we would try to, before they went on mission, we'd have intelligence on where the worst of these anti-aircraft operations were, and you try to avoid those. And the same with, there would be, you'd have the fighter MiGs that would drop in over North Korea. They were sitting right up there on the border of North Korea and China. And they would just hop right over the Yalu River, and they'd come down and take shots at everybody. Well, we finally got a group that could take care of them pretty well. And that was late in the war. And I'm not sure they really call the Korean War still a war. I call it a war because I was gone for about 9 or 10 months over there. But that's what I did. I briefed the whole time that I was in Korea, and had some terrible things happen over there, but that were events that happened that cost a lot of lives. But we were fortunate to come home without a scrap, and they had, and we lost a lot of friends. And there were a lot of experiences back in those days over there, because who was our favorite baseball player, Ted
Williams?
Ted Williams. He was in the Marine Corps, and he was flying. They'd been recalled, and they would always land at our base when they came out of North Korea, because they needed to refuel. And Ted Williams would come in, and we would debrief after each mission. They would come back, and we would debrief what they'd seen, what they dropped, what they'd done here and there. And a lot of times they had photography on what, when they were striking these train derailment areas and all that. So, but we had that experience with a lot of guys that were big name people that had come back in the Marine Corps that were flying over in Korea, and we would debrief them a lot, frequently. And so it was a pretty good experience all in all. And like I say, it was. I just soon it never happened, but having happened, I'm glad that I'm not a hero or anything, but I did my little bit while I could while I was over there.
I tell you, we still hadn't got that straight over there yet, though, have we, Corey?
No, we haven't. Still going on. Still got the 39th parallel, I think. Not sure.
I'll tell you what. Frank, if I ask you about the accomplishments of which you are most proud in your life, what would you tell me?
Well, I'd say obviously families first. I think business, creating having a business that's been successful and has provided jobs and opportunities for a lot of people who are my dear friends, has been high on my list. I think that I was brought up, you talk about service to community, I was brought up believing that you don't ever take any more out of a community than you put back in. That's got to be one of your motivations. I mean, you just can't take all the time. You got to put. Son. So from that standpoint, that came pretty easy. I got started in the JCs. The JCs are the most giving organization back in those days you could imagine, and we'd do everything, from food to the poor. We had a program for everything, and I was very active in the JCs for about 3 or 4 years, and I think they got me thinking about community service more. And I just kind of matriculated or moved on from there to another organization and did some other things, and that's how I got involved. And I wasn't looking to. I just, the situation would develop, and somebody would say, "Well, do you want to do this?" And I'd say, "Well, yeah, I'll do it." I was a great believer in the hospital system. I worked over there. I was on the board of trustees, but after that, we had an organization that was called the Greenville. It was a corporation that was formed where we could do some things we couldn't do as a state appointed hospital. It was a law anyway, and I was on that board for about 4 years, and then we kind of recast our foundation board. So I was in and out of that for 10 or 12 years at the hospital. That was one of the most satisfying things that I did. Because we built our hospitals. It's been built by a lot of people after me, because I went off in '88, '89. I'm an old head now. But that on a physical, day-to-day routine, hands-on, that was probably the most time-consuming because a lot of maintenance and all that. But that, and then you go on through the United Way. Lord have mercy, what we do with the United Way, and we've got a great one in Greenville, and it's grown, and we're raising about $14-15 million a year now, and we got a lot of good things going. But there again, it's been leadership. People in our community get behind it, and if they get behind it, there's much you can't do. In my church, I mentioned Christ Episcopal Church, and it's meant a great deal to me, and that's one of the great things that I really enjoyed being associated with, because marriages, deaths, we carry the whole gamut through the church. Some great people there, great rectors, and great people. So I can't say enough about that. And coming on down the line, what else you want me to say?
I think you've done a great job.
It's been a pleasure.